Welcome to the PeakDay podcast, where we talk about family, fertility, and natural family planning with our friends. My guests today are Ellen and James Hercash. For more than 40 years, James and Ellen have been living and teaching a vision of marriage rooted in faith and joy. Their story began with handwritten letters, cassette tapes, and a long-distance romance spanning 500 miles between Canada and New Jersey. Long before they became NFP teachers, theology of the body educators, marriage prep presenters, and founders of Full Quiver Publishing, they were two young Catholics discerning whether God was calling them to spend their lives together. Today, James and Ellen share the lessons that they've learned through decades of marriage, ministry, and helping couples discover God's beautiful plan for love, sexuality, and family life. Thank you, Ellen and James, so much for being on the PeakDay podcast.
We're glad to be here.
All right, let's start with Ellen. Let's go way back now. Before you met James, you spent years praying, "Please God, send me a man." So looking back now, what do you think God was teaching you during that season of waiting?
Well, patience, I'm sure. Also trust in him. At the time, I was not a faithful Catholic. I was a Catholic, but did not believe in all of the church teachings. But I knew enough to pray to God.
We met, and then there was a year, and then we met again on another trip that she had taken up, and it didn't take too long at that point to know that this was the one. Now, Ellie, of course, needed a date, but that wasn't to come until later because frightened James needed some time to think about that. But I knew Ellie. I wanted to be with Ellie for the rest of my life. I knew that, and once you know that, it's really just putting the other pieces of the puzzle in there to see. Okay, so I'm not able to work right now because I'm still in education. So she can get a job, and once we sort of figured out that mess, it was like, yeah, we don't want to be apart anymore. I mean, this is enough, of living away from each other. I think in my case, as I said, I did have some friends who used NFP, so I thought, okay, there must be something to that. Why would somebody do that if they had other easier medical ways? So there's got to be something to it. I got to think about that, right? So I did, and I have to say, it's also this goes along with the idea of chastity before marriage or not engaging in intercourse. The idea is that it was really about the preciousness of Ellie in my life. I mean, she was so important to me that I didn't want to do some stupid goofy thing which would come between us or cause any difficulties or problems. And I guess I interpret that now as I look back. Back then it was more like a fear, but right now I think I can see it more as a just respecting her integrity as a person. Don't cross a line that you don't know what that's going to do to you, or how it's going to change your relationship. And so that was very important to me, and I carried that on through our discussions.
Now, I didn't know this, Ellie. I was hoping we would not use birth control, and honestly, I mean, I thought, what planet is he from? Everybody uses birth control, right? I hadn't really met a faithfully practicing Catholic that followed all of the precepts and teachings of the church.
So how did choosing chastity strengthen your relationship rather than maybe limit it?
So I would say...
and this is before and after marriage, I'm sure.
Right? Yeah, it applies to both, right? Because very difficult, being chaste before marriage, and then because it was very difficult, especially when Ellie wasn't convinced that it was maybe the right way to go, and then while we were married, of course, we experienced the chastity within marriage, the treating of each other as individuals of great integrity and preciousness. To me, that was our main goal. But our great struggle was, how do we treat each other, and how do we think about each other, and how do we express love to each other, and when do we do that, and are we having children?
Through all of this, I was beginning to understand more about, what the church taught, how we were experiencing marital love. And honestly, I would say it took me 6 months. But 6 months into our marriage, I think I became the biggest commercial for NFP. Why do more people not know about this? Why is it called rhythm? It's not rhythm. And so I started evangelizing. I started talking to people.
So had you actually taken like a formal course, or were you self-taught, or?
We did. We went to, I believe it was 2 classes in New Jersey. And it was funny because it was just before we were married. We went to the door of the NFP couple and we opened it, and she was 9 months pregnant. And she must have read my mind. She said, "Oh, very much planned pregnancy." Not that it was any of my business, but
Yeah, so we took those classes,
yes,
and then we started using it
and then we wanted to teach it.
and reading about it, and then immediately, I don't know, it was like within the first 6 months, whenever
About
you
a
became
year.
convinced that it was
Yeah.
actually working.
After we used NFP for 3.5 years and we decided to be open to a pregnancy on one of our anniversaries, we got pregnant immediately with twins. So this was to show our parents, hey, this works. It works to achieve pregnancy. It works to.
Yeah, because otherwise they would be thinking, oh, they're probably infertile, and that's why
Right.
this NFP apparently works for them.
Right.
But
So you were convinced of, the efficacy of NFP. You began teaching pretty much right away, and now you've spent more than 4 decades involved in NFP and marriage preparation. So looking back over, that's a long span of time, 40 years. So do you see any difference in the needs of engaged couples in the 1980s versus what maybe their needs are today?
well, I mean, in an essential sort of way, the needs have always been the same. You have to realize that you're getting into a relationship where you don't know all the facts and figures of what's going to happen to you over the next little while. There's a beautiful sense of trust required there, a commitment, of course, and then trusting Mother Church that there's wisdom there to be gained, to try to help you on your way, and the grace that you can get from sacraments. So that's always been the essential need. So technology has really uh, colored the presentations that we give to a certain extent, but I believe it's always the same. It's always the same essential requirement for pre-marriage. Yeah.
So looking back, of all the couples that you've taught over the years, do you have any specific memories or transformations that have brought you like real joy and satisfaction?
The couples I would say the couples that took our course to become pregnant, maybe they had tried for 8 months, and through using fertility awareness, they were able to become pregnant and changing their diet, and Marilyn Shannon's book and all that whole thing. I think those were the most joyous because they were able to have children and create new life.
And I guess we don't get a whole lot of feedback from a whole lot of people. I mean, once you've taught an NFP class, life goes on, and sometimes you'll run into the gambit, but it's few and far between. I think we probably run into more people we've given pre-marriage instruction to, which would include our 2 presentations that we give on NFP
Right.
there. So we do get more people.
Yeah, we've taught about maybe just under 500 couples, and that includes all the online ones. But for marriage prep, we've been doing marriage prep since 1984, and some of the classes have had 50 to 100 couples. So we've taught more couples through marriage prep than we have NFP. And so those are the ones we usually come in
That
contact
we
with.
would see again, and they would make comments about, oh, you were our pre-marriage instructors. That was so good, or whatever, And
Hey, we're still married. Now
yeah,
you think that's good.
yeah.
So over all those years, what do you what is your impression that couples maybe misunderstand the most about natural family planning?
I think it would possibly be the amount of abstinence. Uh, I think some couples think that it's most of the cycle of abstinence and they don't understand that it's essentially just the fertile time. Some couples say, well, heck, if NFP is just as effective and as contraception, why can't I use contraception? And so that leads into a conversation about what is different from contraception and NFP. And it's the whole free, total, faithful, fruitful with NFP that you can have with contraception.
Yeah, and I would add that one gross misunderstanding is how positive the effect of abstinence is on a person's character and on their faith life and on their relationship. I mean, I just love talking to couples, which is a little strange perhaps, but I love talking to them about my experience with abstinence and how it um, changed the way I look at everything that happens between Ellie and I. The patience required, the honor and respect required, all of that. Those tentacles go into every other part of our life. And it's not that we don't have troubles with our relationship. Of course we do, but there's just this amazing foundation that's there because of that one essential struggle with abstinence. I mean, you want to know who you really are, you give yourself that challenge and you find out pretty quickly who you are in terms of your persistence or your sense of hope or your all those things, right? So
Ellie, can you expand a little bit on the statement that you made about uh, contraception and natural family planning really being two totally different things?
NFP keeps a couple one, and contraception does not do that. No matter how well meaning the birth control advocates are, you can never be one totally spiritually if you're using contraception.
So, can we talk a little bit more about theology of the body and how you kind of grew into that ministry as well?
In the beginning, we used that old, I don't know how long,
springtime of your life, I think it
yeah,
was called
we used that
CCL.
old CCL thing, and we would go into high schools and for 7 years or so, and it just seemed like the logical progression, and really you want to get the kids at the teen age in order to explain to them what this is, so that by the time they are going to marriage prep, they've heard about NFP, theology of the body, Pope John Paul II, etc.
Yeah,
So,
because they're never going to learn about the profound meaning of sex just from the street. It's just not going to happen. This was a Yeah, this was the whole boatload of meaning and helpfulness that we offered, and not everybody received it well, but that doesn't matter. It's in time. You never know what good it can bring. But the amount of teenagers that would write on their response form of how the course went or
yeah,
whatever, the amount of those kids who would write down something like, "Oh, I'm so glad somebody said this," or "It's so good not to feel pressured to be in the cliques and have to be forced to be in relationships." There was a light in their eyes that they were able to hear something so meaningful about the situation. So
mm-hmm.
What are questions that young people are asking today, maybe that are different from what they were asking 20 or 30 years ago, or are they the same?
it seems that kids these days uh, are taking more of an analytical approach to the sexuality thing. When the culture opens up all of this nuance that they have regarding sex, sexuality, identification, and things like that, it seems like there's a large body of work to decipher for these kids. Like there's a lot of things to, and theology of the body just met that demand or need for them to talk about those things in a very nuanced way, where I don't know if the typical even a Catholic presentation from 20, 30 years ago may not have been able to do it. It gave them so much to chew on that the questions that they could ask were actually the things they wanted to be able to ask, but perhaps before that, how do I even formulate the question? We gave them material upon which they could formulate questions, which I found to be more analytical and more focused compared to what we might have been able to say to somebody 20 or 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about Full Quiver Publishing. What inspired you to found that, and why did you see a need for Catholic fiction?
Well, it started one day in front of the Blessed Sacrament. I did not hear God's booming voice or anything, but I had an experience in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and I really felt called to share my story of conversion with, coming from a, cafeteria Catholic to a faithful Catholic to involved in all the ministries we're involved in, and also going through miscarriages. We've lost 7 babies before birth, including a set of twins. And I wanted to share my story, but I also wanted to share my great-grandmother's story, because she was an early proponent of birth control rights in the early 1900s. And a lot of what I have figured out and learned about her was from what my mother told me about her grandmother. And so that got me started. I wrote a book. He helped me. I couldn't do it without him. And then we thought about publishers. There wasn't at the time any Catholic publishers taking fiction on a regular basis, and we're talking 25 years ago. And so we decided to start our own publishing company and kind of call it Theology of the Body Fiction. And at that time, we were only thinking of publishing my books. But it got to a point where we were doing so well, we started taking submissions and are now publishing other authors. And I think we have 42 authors and 86 published books, and only 13 of those books are mine. So and it's
only
all,
13, yeah.
Yeah, and so it was funny because people didn't even realize that we had this publishing company, and I would get emails and they would say, I wrote this story about John Paul II's Theology of the Body. What do you think? And I said, well, we have a publishing company, and that's how that began. And that's about 15 years ago when we started Full Quiver Publishing. And really, I wanted to write stories. I wanted to publish stories that a teenager could read. Might be edgy. The information might be edgy, but it wouldn't be graphic, and it wouldn't have violence or any kind of sexual, explicit sexual stuff in it. And so that's how we began. He's now he does all our covers and helps me with editing, and that was the inspiration.
When a stranger asks us about our company, we always say that it's a niche company. It's a very, very narrow situation here, and it's true, because initially, if you wrote a novel as a Catholic with Catholic themes, it wasn't appropriate for the Christian market, because it might have Mary and it might have things in it which just wouldn't be right.
The rosary,
and it wasn't appropriate for the secular culture because it was too religious, and it wasn't really even appropriate for many of the Catholic publishers because a lot of people didn't want to touch fiction. It was largely a nonfiction um, milieu, and so we were just thinking to ourselves like, why are so many people trying to get their stuff published with us? And it was because really there's nowhere else to go. Now that today that's not
There are
entirely
more
true,
Catholic
obviously,
fiction publishers,
but we
thankfully.
felt like we were the niche kind of grew on its own. It was an organic process, really. When you were first writing about your grandmother and your story, it was going to be a nonfiction. It was going to be like a journal type of
Yeah,
thing, or you can even call it ancestry, I suppose,
yeah.
right, to a certain extent. But we, I come from a completely creative background. Everything I do is fictional, I suppose. But I said to her, well, why don't you write a novel about it, you know? So that's really what made her think, oh, it could be a creative novel. Okay, well, let me try that, right?
Through writing my novels, I became a much better writer. And because we both kind of understood that the better that a novel is written, the more the themes will be
Impactful yeah,
impactful
permeate
or
the reader's mind.
right.
Yeah.
And so if you write a book and it's straight, it's not as good quality and it's just straight teaching of Catholic truth or whatever, you're going to have a really small niche market. But if you write, and my second book, with Regina Doman's help, actually, I ended up writing my second book, which is totally fiction. So the sky's the limit, right? It actually wound up winning. It was the first Catholic novel to win in the IPPY Awards, the Independent Publisher Book Awards, back in 2009. So between my first and second book, I learned quite a lot. And so the better something is written, the better any kind of message flows through.
So fiction can really kind of communicate truths, um, maybe in a more palatable way, could we say, than just like a lecture or, making an argument or something.
Right. I got an email within the first couple of years of my first book. And the young man was a teenager at the time, and he was a friend of my son's, so he called me Mrs. Herkash. And he said, Mrs. Herkash, I want you to know how much I've learned about the Catholic Church's teachings just by reading your book. I understand them so much better. And now he's married and the father of 4 or 5 kids. And that made me realize that this is a very worthwhile thing to do, even though we don't make very much money from this. It's more of a ministry.
If a young engaged couple were sitting across from you today, what one piece of advice would you want most to tell them?
I would say marriage is not always easy. Marriage is sacrifice and love is sacrifice. Uh, the more sacrificial the marriage is, probably the stronger a marriage is. You're not going to go riding on the horse and there'll never be problems and everything will be fine, and you will have problems. They will come. And it's just sacrifice is the key.
Yeah, and I guess in one of our pre-marriage course presentations, we try to make the point that that it's through this sacrifice and difficulty that we find out who we are, and if we want to give ourselves to each other as the best gift we can offer another person, we need to really find out who we are to do that, because otherwise the gift is unknown and undescribed and uncrafted. So think of yourself as a gift. Hone your skills as a person and as a personality. And I think one of the ways to know yourself is to know God in the best way that you can. And I don't want to sound highfalutin. It's just be on that course, of trying to discover who you are in the bigger scheme of things. I always say to the pre-marriage folks that whenever we see things the way God sees them, it's like we're seeing them from a bigger picture than the way we would like to see things, or maybe it's more comfortable for us to see things. And every time you see things from a bigger picture, even aside from talking about using the word God in the sentence, you're seeing things more in a more healthy way, where your little annoyances and problems and issues really don't amount to that much. It's really the larger, more important things that we need to worry about. God is the primary way that you can find out what those are, but also just widening your view in whatever way you can.
When you look back over your journey, that began with written letters and cassette tapes, and then your decades of ministry, where do you clearly see God's providence the most?
For me, first, God knew me so well that the way to bring me back to him was to have me meet James, somebody like him. Because, that first kind of disagreement about contraception versus not using contraception before we were married, it's just amazing how open I was, because it was James. I had already fallen in love with him. I was already giving him my life. And so I think that he understood, God understood, that this was the way to bring me back to him. And, I'm in awe that God is so all-knowing and so wonderful that he does things like that.
I would say much the same thing, in that it seems like the remedy to all of the difficulties I have in my personality were dealt with through my understanding of my relationship with Ellie, through my understanding of the church's teaching on relationship and sexuality, and so it really was a conditioning process that I would have wanted, even though I may not have asked for it aloud when I was younger. But now that I look at it, it was like that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to be trained in a way that I could truly understand the deepest meaning I could regarding my life and my life with Ellie. Yeah.
Thank you very much for being on the PeakDay podcast, James and Ellen. It's been beautiful talking with both of you, and thank you so much for your 40 plus years of ministry.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed it a whole lot, and yeah, you're a very gracious host. Thank you.